movies have been entertaining us since the early 1900s, and as people realized how much money they were making, large corporations were willing to invest millions upon millions of dollars to create the next big hit. But as you know it, this investment always comes with a risk, because what if no one watches your movie? Today we're talking about just that, the biggest movie flops in history since 1990, according to the Wikipedia article linked below. So strap in, boys, because this one is gonna be a beautiful mess.
Could be worse.
Worse. How could this be worse?
Let's start this off with Inchan, a movie with a crazy story that involves cults and a latex-wearing 70-year-old man.
Inchan. Yeah.
Inchan was released in 1981 and was trying to tell the story of the Inchan battle during the Korean War. This movie is truly a cult catastrophe, and I mean that a cult literally funded it. More specifically, it was funded by Sun Myung-moon, the leader of the Unification Church, or also known as the Moonies. This was done in secret though, and only revealed after the movie already flopped. The budget for this movie was $46 million, of which $30 million came from the cult. The movie only grossed about $5 million worldwide and was immediately pulled from theaters as soon as people found out how bad it was. There were many reasons for why it was such a horrible movie. The writing was horrible, the acting was laughable, the romantic melodrama mixed terribly with the war epic, and I mean overall it was just plain old bad. Of course, they also had massive production issues like reshoots, recuts, and inconsistent tones. The 74-year-old Laurence Olivier was paid over $1 million just for a few minutes of his time. If you think about it, the whole movie is really just a rich, crazy man's fever dream, trying to convert the whole world to his religion. I mean, the producers even went so far to hire up psychics to bless the script. Just crazy people stuff. Alright, let's stop talking about lunatics and start talking about crazy movies, because in 1991 the Hudson Hawk took over as the biggest movie flop of its time.
I'm being blackmailed into robbing the Vatican by a psychotic American corporation and the CIA.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if you asked a drunk man to write a movie? Well, wonder no more, because that's exactly how the Hudson Hawk was invented. Well, kind of. The idea of the Hudson Hawk was initially created by Bruce Willis and a friend of his while they were drunk in a bar in New York. Then, many years later, as Bruce Willis had become a superstar with Die Hard and Die Hard 2, he approached the producer of those two movies to pitch his new idea. Bruce Willis was gonna be the co-writer and the lead in his new movie. This movie is weird. So weird, in fact, it's kind of hard to describe what exactly it was about, but I'll try to do my best. It's an action, comedy, musical heist movie, starring Bruce Willis as a wisecracking cat burglar out of prison, who now has to steal the inventions of Leonardo da Vinci to stop evil alchemists among Vatican conspiracies. Yeah, it's exactly as weird as it sounds. The reason why the movie flopped wasn't even necessarily because it was weird or new, but rather because it was a cartoonish comedy musical piece that was advertised as the next big action flick. Just another case of studio execs being completely out of touch. According to the Wikipedia article linked below, the movie only made about $17 million in the box office. With an estimated budget of about $65 million, that means that the movie only made a fourth of its money back. That being said, even though it did terribly at the box office, it still somehow managed to build a cult following a few years after release. Today, through DVD sales, TV airings, and streaming services picking it up, the movie actually managed to start making a profit. As the studio hasn't published any exact numbers for this list, we're going purely with the box office numbers. Hudson Hawk would stay on top for quite a while, so until that changes, let's talk about the classic movie flop of Race the Titanic. Race the Titanic is a legendary flop that's often cited in Hollywood as the classic example of all budget, no brains. It was supposed to be a thrilling blockbuster, but it sank harder than the actual Titanic. The movie was based on a best-selling Clive Cussler novel, who, by the way, after seeing the movie, disowned it and refused to sell the rights to his book for many years to come. The plot: the US government needs a rare mineral called byzanium to power a secret missile defense system, and the only known supply just so happens to be at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean inside the Titanic. So they do the logical thing. They try to raise the entire ship from the ocean's floor. The studio spent a massive $40 million building huge models, flooding a tank in Malta, and trying to turn a slow-moving plot into a blockbuster. Which, by the way, they failed miserably. And spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, when the Titanic is finally raised, the mineral isn't even there. It's basically just a really slow and pointless movie that doesn't manage to capture any of the magic of the novel it's based on. It made roughly $7 million worldwide. With a budget of $40 million and a loss that steep, one of the producers said it would have been cheaper to lower the Atlantic. Raise the Titanic was released in 1980 and remained on this list all the way to 1999. So let's talk about a different movie that would also remain for really long. In 1995, Cutthroat Island would take the top spot.
The action-adventure event of the season. Open fire!
Cutthroat Island was a big-budget pirate adventure starring Gina Davis and directed by her then-husband Rennie Harlin. The goal was simple: to revive classic pirate movies with massive ships, big explosions, and exotic locations. The exact budget for the movie is actually not known. It is estimated to be somewhere between $98 and $115 million. Now those are ginormous numbers, especially at the time, because it was the fourth most expensive movie ever made at release. Batman Forever, True Lies, and Waterworld were the only movies more expensive than this. Not only did they have to create giant sets and ships for their movie, they also had a lot of production problems with crew walkouts, delays, and they even lost their original male lead, Michael Douglas. They also didn't have a lot of star power to promote the movie. Overall, critics slammed it as soulless, overlong, and confusing. They said the dialogue was wooden and the tone changed wildly between campy and gritty. And while the sets and stunts were very impressive, it really seemed like a vanity project. Overall, the movie only made about $16 million worldwide. This meant that the studio lost over $90 million on this movie. It effectively bankrupted Carolco Pictures, which was the studio behind Terminator 2 and Rambo as well. The studio really bet it all on this movie and it didn't pay out. In the end, it really did the opposite of what it was trying to achieve, because its failure scared other studios so much from making other pirate films that it took until 2003 with Pirates of the Caribbean for any new big-budget pirate film to come out. Cutthroat Island would remain on top for a really long time. So until the next movie to take it over appears, let's talk about The Postman.
Who's responsible for that?
The Postman, a movie released in 1997, is one of the most infamous vanity projects in Hollywood history. It's an $80 million movie that, according to Wikipedia, has lost over $70 million in total. Thereby, it quickly became the second most expensive movie flop of its time. The premise actually sounds quite interesting, and I'm sure they could have done something great with it. It's set in a post-apocalyptic America, where society has broken down into scattered settlements. The main character of this movie is a drifter who pretends to be a US postal worker in order to scam food and shelter, but then accidentally becomes a symbol of hope and national unity. Of course, this character is played by the man who also directed the movie, Kevin Costner. It sounds quite interesting and like it would do well. So why did it fail? Well, let's start this off with the fact that Kevin Costner directed a different post-apocalyptic movie just a couple years prior. This movie was Waterworld, and it was also a massive flop. So honestly, I have no idea why studios thought it was a great idea to give this man $80 million. The Postman was about 3 hours long, and it was really slowly paced. The main character, who is played by the man who wrote the script, is shown to be some sort of messiah. I mean, the whole movie even ends with a statue of him being built, with dialogue that tries so hard to be deep, and a movie taking itself way too seriously. It in turn became a really goofy and hilarious experience. Today, The Postman has a bit of a cult following among people who like to watch movies that are so bad they're good. But other than those, the only thing that people usually remember it for is losing a lot of money. In 1999, a different movie would take the number 2 spot, and this time it wasn't a movie that was bad by itself, but rather one that was plagued by every production disaster you could possibly imagine. Let's talk about The 13th Warrior.
As you say, foolish and expensive.
The 13th Warrior is one of the most spectacular production disasters of the 1990s. A film that had a cool premise, a big star, and a respected director, but got buried by reshoots, rewrites, and a bloated budget. It's a classic example of a movie where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It's a historical action thriller based on Michael Crichton's novel Eaters of the Dead, which blends the myth of Beowulf with real-world Viking history. Michael Crichton is a huge name in the industry, as he's also the original writer for the novel of Jurassic Park, The Andromeda Strain, and many others. We'll get back to him soon, but first, let's talk a bit more about the early production of the movie. You see, The 13th Warrior was first shot and directed by John McTiernan in 1997. He is the man behind Die Hard and Predator. Test screenings were completely disastrous though. Audiences found it confusing, dark, and dull. This is when Michael Crichton, the author of the novel, decided to dust off his old directing mantle and try to save the movie. He took complete control, requested many reshoots, changed the scripts, and even hired Jerry Goldsmith to write a whole new musical score. It took him a whole 2 more years to finish the movie, and when it was done, it became a bit of a tonal mess. It was somewhat noticeable that the movie was really just a patchwork of many different pieces made by 2 different people, and considering the many production issues, the studio wasn't too confident in the movie, and so they did minimal marketing for it. The budget was originally supposed to be $85 million, but due to the many changes after the original test screening, it ended up costing somewhere between $100 and $160 million to make. It is unclear exactly how much money it costs, and in these cases we like to go with the lower numbers for our lists. This means that it is very well possible that the movie lost more money than even Cutthroat Island. And the craziest part of it all? It's really not a bad movie. Nowadays it's even considered a good watch for people who enjoy more gritty historical films. On a different note, as Disney's movies were becoming ever more profitable ever since the early 90s, studios started pouring more and more money into their animated works. Unfortunately, this didn't always work out for them, and in 2003, an animated movie finally overtook the 7-year-long reign that Cutthroat Island had. While the failure of this movie didn't bankrupt an entire studio, it did kill an art form. I'm talking about Sinbad and the Legend of the Seven Seas.
Sinbad!
Yeah.
Sinbad and the Legend of the Seven Seas didn't just flop, it buried an entire art form. As 3D animation kept progressing and became more and more normal on the big screen, 2D started to be seen as somewhat archaic. Parents thought it looked too old, and kids thought that 3D was just a new cool thing and 2D was lame. Sinbad, being a 2D animated movie, already started off on the wrong foot. Still, the movie didn't do too horribly in the box office itself. While it had a budget of around $60 million, it still managed to make around $80.8 million in return. That being said, the marketing and distribution costs were huge. So huge in fact that the movie ended up losing a total of around $125 million. This prompted DreamWorks execs to announce that 2D was dead and 3D was the future. Shortly after, Disney also stopped producing 2D movies, except for one outlier in 2009. To be honest though, Sinbad was set up for failure. It was a somewhat generic looking pirate movie that released in the same summer as Finding Nemo and wasn't based on any popular IP. Big animation studios would almost entirely blame Sinbad and Disney's previous flop Treasure Planet for the reason why they switched to 3D. But the reality is a little bit more complicated. Sure, 3D was more easily marketable at the time because it still looked like something new and high-tech, but that alone wouldn't last for too long and they were very much aware of it. The fact is, 3D animation is a lot cheaper for studios to produce than 2D. Partially due to technical limitations, like the fact that in 3D you can sometimes reuse models, reuse code, and reuse animations for certain parts. It also made it quite a lot easier to produce merchandise and video games, simply because they could directly use the models they had in their movies. Still, this alone doesn't really save as much money as it sounds like. Instead, the real money saver lies elsewhere. In the early 2000s, most 2D animators were unionized via the Animation Guild. This meant that they could receive higher wages, more job protections, greater creative involvement, and even great benefits like overtime pay. On the other hand, because 3D animation was still relatively new, most animators were actually not part of any union. That being said, studios still threw huge budgets at their animated works. One of those 3D movies would overtake Cutthroat Island and become the second biggest movie flop. And very fitting to its position, the movie is titled Flushed Away. Flushed Away was the third and final movie in the partnership between DreamWorks and Aardman Animations, with some theorizing that the reason why the collaboration stopped was due to this movie. Aardman Animations was mostly known for their stop-motion films and TV shows, like Shaun the Sheep and Wallace and Gromit. The first two movies they did in collaboration with DreamWorks were Chicken Run and Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. These were both stop-motion pictures that were very beloved and still are to this day. They also only had budgets of around $30 to $45 million each. For Flushed Away, on the other hand, DreamWorks went all in. They decided to give it a budget of $149 million, amounts of money that Aardman Animations had never worked with before. On the other hand, they also used this to force the smaller studio to switch from stop motion to 3D animation. And worst of all, for their collaboration, the movies were now being animated in the US. As you can imagine, this led to quite a lot of production and communication problems. This wasn't the only reason why the movie failed though. Because for one, it's a movie about rats in a sewer world with slugs and frogs, so not exactly the most appealing imagery you could show to children, and it came out in the same summer as Happy Feet, the movie that completely dominated the family market at the time. The movie managed to make about $178 million in the box office, and if they had stuck to similar budgets as they had before for their previous movies, this would have been a huge success. But considering that their budgets was about 3 to 4 times bigger than what they had before, and after counting the marketing and distribution budgets, Flushed Away lost the studio just shy of $110 million. This chart would remain mostly the same for quite a few years. But then suddenly in 2012 we saw a huge explosion of expensive movie flops.
I believed it was a sign. Mars needs moms.
2012 was a great year for the economy. The world was stuck in a never-ending bull market. Most places completely recovered from the 2008 housing crash, and people generally tended to have a lot more money to spend. And around this time, studios started to realize that the more money they threw at a movie, the more likely it was that it would make big bucks. I mean, just look at the Hunger Games, the Pirates of the Caribbean, and even the later Harry Potter movies. Considering this, studios were very willing to take bigger risks. but they did so without truly understanding what made their other big budget movies so successful. And the result of this? John Carter, Battleship, and Mars Needs Moms. The only one of these movies that is still well known today is Battleship, but only because it was incredibly horrible and started off Rihanna's acting career. But for now, let's focus a little bit more on John Carter, because it is the first movie to ever lose a studio more than $200 million. John Carter was Disney's attempt at their next big live-action IP. Especially after the success of the Pirates of the Caribbean, they were looking to replicate those numbers. Unfortunately for them though, audiences saw it in a very different light. Because of confusing marketing, not many people saw it in the first place, and those who did considered it more of a cheap Avatar knockoff than the next Pirates of the Caribbean in space. The director of this movie was none other than Andrew Stanton, the man behind WALL-E and Finding Nemo. So while he did have some very impressive movies under his belt, this was his first ever time directing in live action. This inevitably led to the production costs becoming even higher. At the end, this movie had a budget of about $306 million. It really seems like most of the budget went out of the window to produce the movie in the first place, and almost nothing was left for the marketing. The John Carter marketing campaign is to this day called one of the worst marketing campaigns in movie history. Shortly before starting to advertise this movie, Robert Iger, the CEO of Disney, had already begun talks with George Lucas for buying Lucasfilms, the company behind Star Wars. Because of this, they had no incentive to run a successful sci-fi franchise that could compete with it. The executives in charge of marketing really seemed like they couldn't care less about the success of this movie. They ended up hiring a marketing firm that had never marketed movies before. And not only that, Stanton, who was the movie's director, also often butted heads with this marketing agency. He refused most of their proposals and would instead use his own ideas. While this by itself didn't sound too bad, he wasn't exactly a marketing genius. He also refused to take any criticism to his own ideas. This led to things like a 70s Led Zeppelin song being used in trailers aimed at teenagers and young adults. It led to posters and billboards that were completely out of touch with their target audience, but most importantly, it led to them changing the movie's name from John Carter of Mars to just John Carter. There are so many more reasons why this movie's marketing was just an absolute nightmare. In the end, John Carter lost Disney about $200 million, and it was the last time that Stanton would get his chance at live action. John Carter would remain on top of this list for a very long time. So let's talk about the movie that would take the number 2 position on this list in 2013. The Lone Ranger.
Or I put a hole in you, and I might even shoot myself, because the gun's all tangled in my fingers.
After John Carter's massive failure, Disney tried again at recreating the magic of the Pirates of the Caribbean. This time with a live-action Wild West story. In order to do everything right this time, they based it on a well-known IP, the Lone Ranger IP, which was very famous with westerns in the past. On top of that, they also hired the same team that was behind the Pirates of the Caribbean to make this movie. They even decided to cast Johnny Depp again. So far so good. So what went wrong? Let's start with the fact that Johnny Depp, a white actor, was playing Tonto, the Native American sidekick. He was wearing full face paint, he had a dead crow on his head, and he was overall just looking to be as eccentric and wild as possible. As you can imagine, this led to quite a bit of controversy. But this is only the smallest thing out of the many things they messed up. The movie featured many grand train scenes and other really intricate stunt work. They also had quite a few large-scale practical effects at work. This massively ballooned the budget, and Disney halted the production mid-shoot in 2011. This was mainly due to budgetary concerns. It took months for them to start shooting again, and many of the scenes they previously filmed were completely cut out of the movie. Of course, a big budget isn't necessarily a bad thing, but let's talk about the next mess up. It seemed like the movie really couldn't decide who it was for. It was based on the Lone Ranger IP, so was it more for older Western fans? Or was the excessive slapstick comedy more of a sign for younger audiences and children to see it? But then what about the gritty violence in some of the scenes? And don't even get me started on the tragic Native American genocide subplots. It feels like this movie was trying to appeal to everyone and thereby managed to appeal to no one. The final nail in the coffin for the film was that it released alongside Man of Steel and Despicable Me 2, which completely crushed it in the box office. Disney ended up losing a whole $160 million on this film. It also became their final attempt at trying to start another live-action movie series. Instead, it pushed them more into investing money into Marvel, Star Wars, and remakes. Sure, The Lone Ranger is a little controversial, and it might not be the best movie ever made, but it's a shame that it didn't get any more positive attention. Otherwise, today we would be seeing a lot more original movies by Disney. Anyway, enough about Disney, because in 2018 a dystopian teen sci-fi movie finally overtook The Lone Ranger as the number 2 spot on this list. I'm talking about the incredibly confusing CGI spectacle that is Mortal Engines.
The great predator cities. Survival of the fastest.
In 2018, Mortal Engines rolled into theaters with one of the wildest sci-fi premises in years. Giant cities on wheels devouring smaller cities in a post-apocalyptic world. Backed by Peter Jackson and adapted from a cult favorite novel, it looked like the next big sci-fi franchise. But instead, it crashed. With a budget of over $110 million and a global box office of just about 83 million, Mortal Engines became one of the biggest flops of the decade, losing an estimated $175 million in total. So what went wrong? Well, first, it was a dystopian YA movie, short for young adult. These are action-heavy stories, usually based on books aimed at teens and featuring reluctant heroes, love triangles, and young main characters. Think of Hunger Games or Maze Runner. The thing is, by 2018, there were so many dystopian YA movies that audiences were completely burnt out. I think we can all agree that the genre peaked with the Hunger Games movies, and everything that came after them just kind of seemed like it was slowly getting worse. And the second reason for its failure is that it just had no name recognition. The creators wrongly assumed that the IP was very well known. Unlike the Hunger Games or Harry Potter, Mortal Engine just didn't have big enough of a fan base to drive ticket sales. Lastly, the movie was just plain old bad. Sure, the CGI was quite impressive and the world building looked really cool, but the story itself was lacking an emotional core. Some critics even compared it to watching video game cutscenes, because it had all of the visuals and none of the emotions. Mortal Engine was supposed to be the first in a series of 4 movies, but instead it just ended up as a failure. Well, at least it wasn't as big of a failure as John Carter, or the movie that would overtake it in 2023. I'm sure you all know it. I'm talking about The Marvels.
Which I have never heard of.
I could totally show you. No!
The Marvels was supposed to be a fun intergalactic team-up, but instead it became the world's biggest movie flop yet. It was a perfect combination of superhero fatigue, weak and flat characters, and an underwhelming storytelling. Additionally, it was released during the actors' strike in 2023, meaning that the actors on the movie couldn't even promote it themselves. The movie itself has so many problems. And honestly, I have no idea who at Marvel thought it would be a good idea to make it. And what's even more shocking is that that person thought it would be worth spending $270 million on its budget. I personally believe that the Marvels is the lowest point in the MCU, and they've since recovered quite a bit. You see, the movie released during a time where they were creating a very large number of Disney Plus original shows and MCU movies at the same time. And each time, in order to understand the next movie, you'd have to have seen another 2 or 3 movies and shows before it. Like how to fully understand the Marvels, you'd have to have seen WandaVision and a Disney Plus series, Miss Marvel. But of course, let's not forget that you'd also need to watch the first Captain Marvel movie. And all of that for the shortest movie in the Marvel universe at only 105 minutes long. The movie ended up losing Marvel $237 million. For the team at Marvel itself, this was the last straw, and they ended up restructuring the entirety of the Marvel Studios. They re-evaluated coming projects. They decided to bring back legacy characters and actors like Iron Man and Captain America. But best of all, they've decided to focus on quality over quantity. To this day, The Marvels is the biggest movie flop we've ever seen, and while I honestly personally expected Snow White to end up on top of this list by the end of it, it turns out that that movie only lost about $115 million in total, and therefore doesn't even make the list. Talking about the list, let's discuss the data just a little bit.
Here's a number. What's that shit say? Psych! That's the wrong number!
Hey, thank you for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. I use data from a Wikipedia article linked below to make this list. This article includes the estimated budgets, the estimated box office wins, and also the estimated total loss. The numbers might not be 100% accurate, but I'm just one person and have to rely on these public sources in order to make these videos. If you see anything that is wrong, or if you have any better sources, feel free to comment them below or email them to me.